We now come to the urgent question. Jo Stevens.
Ask the Secretary of State for Wales if he will make a statement on TATA ending the statutory consultation on redundancies at Port Talbot steelworks.
Mr. Speaker, on the 25th of April, TATA announced their strategic direction to proceed with their Port Talbot transformation following the launch of the formal national consultation with the unions on the 6th of February. Technically, the consultation has not concluded either at the national or at the local level. The statutory consultation remains underway, and I understand the company intends to move to local level consultation with staff who may be affected. I know this is a deeply concerning time for the TATA workforce and the wider community. I hold regular conversations and meetings with the unions and management, and will continue to do so as we develop interventions to build a brighter future for Port Talbot. On the 15th of September, we announced an unprecedented £500 million government grant as part of the £1.25 billion investment by TATA Steel to build a new electric arc furnace. TATA Steel employ over 8,000 people, including at Port Talbot, and all of those jobs would be under threat if it weren't for the agreement that we had struck, along with many thousands more in the supply chain. So the transformation is going to be difficult, but the funding has saved 5,000 jobs in the company. It is not the case that we've paid money to put people out of work. We've paid a lot of money out and are paying money out to save 5,000 jobs. We're also looking to modernise production and ensure that steel making in South Wales can continue for generations to come. But going beyond that, to support those who are affected by TATA's decision, we've also put together £100 million towards the creation of the Transition Board, which I chair, and which includes representatives of the UK and Welsh Government, local authorities and industry. The funding includes £80 million from the UK Government and £20 million from TATA, nothing as yet from the Welsh Government, but we hope there will be some, and it will be used to achieve the Transition Board's priorities, the first of which is to support those affected employees to find new, well-paid jobs. But also amongst the Board's priorities is supporting business in the supply chain and the longer-term regeneration of the region. In its most recent meeting last week, the Transition Board endorsed a local economic action plan which will act as a roadmap for how best to use the funding to support those affected. Whilst the ongoing consultation is a matter between the trade unions and the company, we will continue to discuss with all parties. We hope a resolution is found which avoids industrial action. Government will continue to work closely with industry to secure a sustainable and competitive future for the Welsh steel sector. I'm also confident of a good future for Port Talbot and the region, with UK Government progressing ABP's bid to the next stage of up to £160 million of funding to support our nascent floating offshore wind industry, and the progress being made towards establishing the Celtic Freeport, backed by £26 million in UK Government funding.
Secretary of State, just.
Mr. Speaker, last Thursday's news was a gut punch for workers in Port Talbot, with economic consequences that could reverberate across South Wales for decades. I was at the plant last month meeting workers. The sense of the threat of nearly 3,000 people's livelihoods was all-consuming, and the wider supply chain in Llanwern, Shotton and Trostre is vulnerable too. We again urge TATA not to make any irreversible decisions before a general election. My honourable friends, the members for Aberavon, Newport East and West and Llanelli have been proud vocal advocates for their constituents. But in contrast, this government has forked out £500 million, taxpayers' cash, for the loss of 3,000 jobs. And this is their deal and they own it. Added to that, the loss of sovereign steelmaking is a fundamental threat to our UK economy and security. It will constrain our ability to build floating offshore wind that we need to lower energy bills, deliver energy security and create the jobs of the future. We're now around a month away from blast furnace number 5 potentially closing. So what assessment has the government made of the impact of the closure on job losses at the plant and in the supply chain across Wales? And with the talks ongoing between unions and TATA this week, would the Secretary of State, like me, want to see an agreement from TATA that compulsory redundancies will be avoided? What steps will he take to encourage such an agreement? He has said no one will be left behind if they lose their jobs. So will he publish the local economic plan the Transition Board has agreed as the basis for its investment decisions? Mr. Speaker, Labour's National Wealth Fund means the future of UK steel will be fuelled by the skills, talent and ambition of Welsh steelworkers. But until the country is given the chance to have its say at a general election, I want workers across Wales to know that we, on this side of the House, have their backs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to take the Honourable Lady's points one by one, first of all, the £500 million investment is going to save 3,000 jobs. We're not paying money to throw people out of work. We don't want to see anyone thrown out of work. TATA have made a decision to close those blast furnaces based on the losses that they're making. And when they came to us, we said, what can we do to keep people there, to keep people in work? And this was the plan that they came up with. To take the second point, it has no impact on sovereign steelmaking. The Honourable Lady, if she talks to TATA, will understand. The Honourable Lady is chuntering here that, yes, it does. Mr. Speaker, all of the iron ore which goes into those blast furnaces comes from abroad. All of the coal which is turned into coke is coming in from abroad. All of the limestone is coming in from abroad. It therefore has no impact whatsoever on our sovereign steelmaking ability. In actual fact, Mr. Speaker, we have 8 million tonnes of scrap steel in this country, much of which is being exported abroad. We're going to use that scrap steel and put it into the electric arc furnace, which will actually increase our sovereign ability. The Honourable Lady says that this is going to have an impact on our ability to create floating offshore wind. Last time she said it was going to have an impact on our ability to create battleships. The Honourable Lady needs to understand that at the moment, battleships are made using steel plate, and floating offshore wind turbines are also made using steel plate. Steel plate is not made in TATA at Port Talbot. TATA at Port Talbot produces coil, which is thin and therefore not strong enough to make either battleships or floating offshore wind. She asked about the number of people affected. We've been very clear about this from the start. I'm trying to answer the Honourable Lady's questions. I mean, she's asked these questions, and I listed them, and I'm answering them. She asked about the number of jobs affected. We've said all along that we expect it to be around 2,800, but it's for TATA to confirm this once it's gone through the statutory consultation procedure. She's asked about an agreement, whether or not we would encourage TATA to come to an agreement so there are no compulsory redundancies. Of course we would. We don't want to see anyone made redundant against their wishes. We didn't want this process to happen in the first place, but as I said to the Honourable Lady several times, TATA came to the UK government with a threat to pull out, which would have cost 8,000 jobs and the entire supply chain. She asked if the local area action plan can be published. Well, it's not fully finalised yet, it's a roadmap, but the Honourable Lady will surely be aware that the current First Minister was sitting on the board as the Economic Development Minister, the Labour Economic Development Minister in the Senate is on the board, the local Member of Parliament is on the board as a local Senate member, and the Chief Executive of the local authority, along with the representatives of 3 trade unions. So it's hardly a secret document, and it's not as if the Transition Board is meeting in conditions of great secrecy. If the Honourable Lady has any further questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
John Redwood.
Will the government do something about the very high energy prices in this country, made high by regulations and taxes? Doesn't he accept that any kind of steel making is going to be extremely difficult if we have uncompetitive energy? And isn't it wrong to import these things, which means even more CO2, as well as destroying the jobs here?
Speaker, we've looked carefully at the losses that TATA are making. They've come about partly because of the age of the infrastructure which they have in place there. And in fact, they've had to close down the coke furnaces at Morva within the last few weeks. But the reality is the UK government is fully cognizant of the costs of energy at the moment, which is why TATA has benefited from many of the schemes that we've had in place over the last few years, will begin to benefit from the BIS scheme shortly, and from the CBAM scheme at the start of 2027.
Spokesperson Richard Thomson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Despite what the Secretary of State may claim, the Government is investing in support of plans which are going to see approximately 2,800 jobs cut, and with it the capacity to produce virgin steel irreversibly. Now, TATA have announced that they're going to open their voluntary redundancies from the 15th of May. So can the Secretary of State update the House on what he expects those redundancy packages to include? And finally, Mr Speaker, will the Secretary of State join me in condemning threats which appear to have been made by the company to withdraw enhanced redundancy packages in the event that industrial action goes ahead?
Well, Mr Speaker, to answer the honourable gentleman directly, the value of the redundancy package is a matter that will have to be agreed between TATA and the trade unions, but TATA have made it very clear that they want to go well beyond statutory redundancy. They have put several figures out there, some of which will, could be more generous if there is no industrial action. I don't want to see industrial action, but I don't condemn the unions either, who I think have taken a very positive role in discussions in the transition board and outside at the moment, and I do understand the strength of feeling that people have in Port Talbot. To answer two other points the honourable gentleman made, I'm just going to say this again, and I'll say it very clearly for everyone to understand. TATA came to the UK government and said they were going to pull out of steel making in South Wales. This decision would have cost 8,000 jobs, and we think around 12,700 in the wider supply chain. DBT officials, therefore, wanted to come up with a plan that would save as many jobs as possible, which is where the arc furnace plan has come from. That plan will save 5,000 jobs. 5,000 jobs with a government investment of £500 million. It is not the outcome that anyone wants, but it's a better outcome if we see 2,800 jobs lost than if we see 8,000 jobs lost. That is a better outcome. Neither of these are good outcomes, but that's what we wanted to achieve. And I say again, as far as this issue about virgin steel, this is not really about a sovereign ability to produce virgin steel, because all of the elements that go into steel making are being imported from abroad. We are not about to start opening up iron ore mines. It's produced here using iron ore that comes in from abroad, using limestone that comes in from abroad, using coke that is made from coal that comes in from abroad. We can't do this by ourselves, and yet at the same time we've got 8 million tonnes of steel that's being exported abroad. We're going to make use of a resource that is already in our country.
Mumby-Croft.
Speaker, and we watch very closely what's happening in Port Talbot back home in Scunthorpe. Can I ask my right honourable friend, what work has been done to determine the quality of that 8 million tonnes of scrap and whether it will be suitable for use in the electric arc furnaces? And can I ask him as well whether he will reflect on, when it comes to sovereign capability, it's not always about what you may be doing at the moment, what you may choose to make. It sometimes comes down to what you may need to make at some point in the future. And can I remind him that we have a perfectly good mine full of coking coal in Cumbria, and there's an awful lot of limestone under the ground in this country too.
Secretary of State.
Well, the honourable lady is correct that if we wanted to, we could probably find iron ore, coal and limestone from within the UK, but I don't see any great enthusiasm for opening up the mines to do that at the moment. As far as the 8 million tonnes of steel within the UK, that scrap steel that will go into the arc furnace is concerned, both DBT officials and EY have gone over very carefully the business plan being put forward by TATA. But can I just point out to the honourable lady, the UK government are only investing £500 million in this, but TATA are investing £750 million in this. So TATA obviously feel that there is a good, strong commercial case for building that arc furnace, and they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Port Talbot steelworkers in my Aberavon constituency have given their lives to the steel industry. They've given their lives to TATA Steel. This reckless deal that's been done between the UK government and TATA is a hammer blow for them, and we are hoping that there's still time for the employer and the unions to come together and drop the bad deal for steel and adopt the compelling, robust, multi-union deal instead. But can I ask him particularly about contractors in all of this? Everyone knows that for every job you lose in a steelworks, you lose between 2 to 3 more through supply chains and through contractors. So, in fact, the 2,800 number that's being used is a massive underestimate of the devastating impact of these job losses through supply chains and subcontractors. Does he agree with me that, in fact, the number of job losses is far higher than 2,800 if this reckless deal is adopted? And does he therefore agree with me that it's time for everyone to pull back from the brink and adopt that multi-union plan which offers us a bridge to the future rather than the cliff edge which is currently being pursued?
Well, Mr. Speaker, clearly there's going to be an impact on those in the supply chain, and there's been absolutely no doubt about that, and that's why at the last transition board meeting at which he was present we discussed that, and we agreed that we would want to support anyone in the supply chain who's been affected by it, but we can't start putting numbers on it. We're irresponsible to start trying to guess a number of people, other than to agree with the honourable gentleman that it's clearly going to have an effect. I mean, he talks about a reckless plan. This was the only plan on the table. He keeps suggesting that the Syndex plan isn't a plan unless TATA agree to it. I've discussed the Syndex plan with senior management at TATA, with the head of TATA Holdings, Mr. Chandrasekaran in Mumbai. He doesn't believe that that is commercially viable. And he also believes that it would be technically far too difficult to try and build an electric arc furnace on the side of the steel melt shop. The Honourable Gentleman may shake his head. I don't know what the answer is. The Honourable Gentleman says that it is possible to do this, but TATA says it's not. And what the Honourable Gentleman has to realise, it's not the UK government that he has to convince. It is TATA who have to be convinced. The UK government have never said that they would be against the Syndex plan. It is TATA who have to be persuaded.
Sir Robert Butland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend my right honourable friend for his comments and to remind us of the fact that £500 million is no small beer when it comes to an intervention in what is a private industry. There are difficulties with the transition, quite clearly, and a lot of us who care deeply about the steel industry in Wales and Britain are worried about the capacity to do things, as my honourable friend from Scunthorpe said, because we need to in the future. What discussions are there, if there are any, still ongoing as to whether or not TATA will in fact keep one of the existing blast furnaces open for a longer period than the current plan of shutting them down by the end of this year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've had that discussion with senior management at TATA, as have the members of the Labour Party and trade unions and many others. And what TATA have said is that they would continue. They currently face losses of over £1 million a day as a result of keeping those two blast furnaces open. They say that those losses would continue even if one was functioning, because first of all they would have to undertake significant capital expenditure into blast furnace 4 in order for it to go ahead. And secondly, they would have to now import all of the coke which goes into that blast furnace, because of course the coke ovens were shut down with the agreement of the unions because of health and safety concerns. Then they would face the additional technical problem of trying to build an electric arc furnace on the same site as a steel melt shop containing hundreds of tons of molten steel being poured off into casters. That is why they have said very clearly that they will not entertain that proposal. The UK government have never said that we wouldn't entertain that proposal, and if TATA wanted to come forward with a plan to build the arc furnace using the existing grant that the government have put forward, but keeping one blast furnace open for longer, then of course the government would be open to any discussion on that.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
In the Netherlands, political pressure has resulted in TATA investing in an electric arc furnace and direct reduced iron technology, all the while protecting jobs and keeping blast furnaces open. The German government is spending £2.2 billion, over 4 times more than the UK, to transform its steel industry towards hydrogen. Why is the UK so uniquely incapable of effective investment in our strategic steel future?
Mr. Speaker, a few people seem to have the idea that building a DRI plant would resolve this problem. The first point to remember is that if a DRI plant were built on the site, it would probably save another 200 jobs. There's a plant in Texas run by Voestalpine, which produces, I believe, 2 million tonnes or so of steel every year and employs 200 people. So a DRI plant is not going to resolve the problem. DRI plants require access to a regular and affordable amount of natural gas, quite clearly. There is, however, nothing whatsoever to stop TATA at some point in the future from building a DRI plant to go along with the electric arc furnace if they believe that that is a commercially sensible thing to do. But even if they were to do that, Mr. Speaker, it is not really going to resolve the problem that we face of 2,800 jobs being lost in Port Talbot. At best, it would save another 200 jobs.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, but the lack of ambition from this government for our steel industry is just disgraceful. As the Secretary of State should understand, as many of his own constituents work in Llanwern, decisions made about Port Talbot have a direct impact and can lead to problems securing volume for Newport in Llanwern, including, and we're looking at possible potential redundancies and also uncertainty for the long-term future of the plant. It's not too late for the Secretary of State to stand up for his own constituents, show more ambition for our steel industry, as other countries do, and argue for a fairer transition and try to avoid compulsory redundancies. Why won't he do that for his own constituents?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've acknowledged all along that obviously as part of the proposals Port Talbot planned to close down the pickle line at Llanwern, although they wouldn't be doing that until the electric arc furnace was built. We discussed it at the last meeting of the Transition Board, and we all agreed that we would need to make sure that just as we want to help everyone in Port Talbot, we'll want to help anyone affected in Llanwern. The Honourable Lady keeps talking about a lack of ambition. We can all dream about a situation where one blast furnace, BF4, is kept open for another 6 years. But what we can't do is force TATA to continue accepting losses of over £1 million a day in order for that to happen. And I have to say that there has been a lack of responsibility on the behalf of some Labour members, though not any in this chamber here, who seem to have gone around suggesting that they have a special costed secret plan that would save all of those jobs. They don't, Mr. Speaker. They've not put any kind of a costed plan to any senior management in TATA. They've never sat down and said, if you do this, we will give you this, and therefore we could save all of those jobs. They've simply gone around saying that they want to see all the jobs saved. We all want to see every single job saved. But we can't force TATA to continue to take losses of over £1 million a day.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I come from an area of the country which suffered from industrial decline 2 generations ago. And the human impact of what we are seeing happening to Port Talbot will blight the current generation. We talk a lot about a transition to a green economy. When is the government going to invest in the national skills strategy that we need to provide these people in Port Talbot who are about to lose their jobs, and redundancy payments don't last forever, who are about to lose their jobs, a generation be blighted? They need those skills for the 21st century. So will the government commit to a national skills strategy?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady asks, where is the money to support the town of Port Talbot? I've said already, Mr. Speaker, there is £500 million going to build an arc furnace in order to save thousands of jobs. There's £15 million going to regenerate the town. There's £26 million of funding for the Freeport, £7.5 million of funding for Launchpad. And as far as skills are concerned, there's £80 million from the UK government, which will be primarily there to retrain people. There's another £20 million coming in from TATA. There's not been one penny from Welsh Government towards this. They've been able to find £120 million to spend on more Senedd members. They've been able to find £30 million to spend on 20-mile-an-hour road signs. And we've just learned that they've lost, Mr. Speaker, £60 million having set up a bank, but they haven't been able to find one penny as yet to support the steelworkers of Port Talbot.
Mr. Speaker, isn't this just the tail end of a government that even abandoned the words industrial strategy a decade ago? When I asked questions on this, why hasn't the government had the ambition and the vision to realise that the potential is there? For example, if there were a plate mill on this site which could produce the steel for the substructures, for the wind turbines that's being planned to be built in the Celtic Sea around this whole Freeport, around Milford Haven and Port Talbot. There's no industrial strategy, there's no vision, there's no joined-upness, there's just massive sticking plasters from this government.
Mr. Speaker, there are discussions going on about the possibility of building a plate mill on the site when the electric arc furnace is completed. There's nothing whatsoever to stop a plate mill from being built. So the Honourable Gentleman won't be aware of all the discussions going on, but once again I would say respectfully to him, a plate mill will not save 2,800 jobs. We are facing the loss of a significant number of jobs as a result of the decision to close down the blast furnaces. And even if a plate mill were built, or a DRI plant were built, or a hot sink dip line were built on the site, all of which are reasonable things to consider, it would not solve the problem that 2,800 people are facing the loss of their jobs. And that's why the £500 million for the arc furnace was so important, as was the £80 million for the Transition Board.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We talked earlier about the supply chain, and the repercussions of this decision will be felt across South Wales. So could I ask the Secretary of State directly, has he had secured any commitment whatsoever from TATA about workers at those downstream facilities across South Wales about their future?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. TATA have been very clear that they were originally going to close those sites, but they now expect all those sites to remain open. And during the process of building the arc furnace while the blast furnaces are shut down, they will be bringing steel in from elsewhere to make sure that the product is going into those other plants.
Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Well, with the closure of the coke ovens, making the viable lifespan of the blast furnaces all the more precarious, and the electric arc furnace still being a long way off, we will rapidly reach a situation where Port Talbot can no longer supply the Trostre works internationally in my constituency. So what talks has the Secretary of State had with TATA bosses about securing high-quality interim supplies for Trostre and securing all the jobs there?
Mr. Speaker, I have spoken to TATA on that very issue, and they've been very clear that they would expect steel to come into, they would have to import steel in order to feed Trostre, and that they're willing to do that. As far as the electric arc furnace is concerned, the timeline is ambitious, but it is ongoing at the moment. The groundworks will start very shortly. The planning permission should go in autumn. Hopefully it will be turned around and dealt with by early next year, and it will then take about 2 years to build the electric arc furnace.
Chris Brown. The Secretary of State casually discards 2,800 jobs and is so uninterested in the on the ongoing effect on the rest of the economy in South Wales that he hasn't even made an assessment of what the economic impact will be on the South Wales valleys more generally. Can he clear up for us precisely how many other people's jobs are likely to be affected? Is he aware that in the last few months, we've had 500 jobs go at UK Doors and Windows in the Rhondda and 100 jobs go in the last 24 hours in the Rhondda at Everest 2020? It doesn't feel, as my honourable friend for Cardiff West says, that they've got an industrial strategy. It doesn't feel as if they've got an anti-poverty strategy. And for that matter, they haven't got a levelling up strategy, have they, either? Isn't it just time we had a new Secretary of State for Wales so that we can get on and have a proper plan for the economy of South Wales?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to have to say to the honourable gentleman, but it's slightly insulting for him to suggest that the tone in which I have set out the answers to the questions here suggests some sort of casual disregard or a lack of interest. I can assure the honourable gentleman, there is nothing whatsoever in the Wales office at the moment that is more important than securing the future for Port Talbot. And I'm very sorry that, frankly, whilst this government is putting up £500 million to ensure the future of steelmaking in South Wales, we are demonstrating an interest in making steel, and some of the honourable members opposite are more interested in making headlines.
Jonathan Edwards.
My constituents who work in Port Talbot inform me that there has been no progress on enhanced redundancy negotiations between the unions and TATA. So considering the scale of public investment involved, will the British government use its leverage to ensure that TATA treats its workforce with a degree of dignity?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. And I will say this, that I do think that TATA now need to come forward with a bit more information about who exactly we can expect to see being made redundant and what their current skill sets are so that we can begin targeting the help. The challenge that we've had up until now is that we haven't had the information as to who's being made redundant, and TATA have made it clear that it won't automatically be the people in the, on the blast furnaces, for example, that are made redundant, because they're hoping to retain some of the people who are working there, but offer redundancy to other people in other parts of the plant. So we haven't had the information as of yet, but I think the time has come now to have that information, and we, of course, want to ensure that any redundancy packages are as generous as possible.
Justin Mathers.
Speaker, my constituents who work at the Shotton plant are very worried about the news that they're hearing, concerned about their colleagues' futures, but they're also wondering what this means for them. Clearly there's a real issue in terms of knock-on effects, not just in the supply chain but in other TATA plants around the country. So what assessment has the Secretary of State made, both in the short, medium and long term, about the impact on other plants of these decisions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we were very clear that whilst the arc furnace was being built, we wanted to make absolutely certain that all those other plants around Wales were able to receive product for them to finish. And TATA have been very clear that that is going to happen, but they will have to bring it in from elsewhere over the next 2 to 3 years, but that will happen. So it will not have the impact that the honourable gentleman is rightly concerned over. But of course it's only possible because of what some of his colleagues have described as a reckless deal. What would have been reckless would have been for us to see TATA in an office and say, OK, you're going to make 8,000 people redundant and you're going to shut down all of these sites and there's nothing for us to do about it. That would have been reckless. What we actually did was to come forward with a £500 million package of taxpayers' money, and rightly so, to support both the continuation of steelmaking in Port Talbot and to make sure all of the other plants in Wales continued, Shotton, Trostry and Llanwern, all continued to receive product during that interim period so that we didn't see significant job losses anywhere else.
Mr Speaker, it's an increasingly dangerous world, as alluded to by the member for Scunthorpe and Swindon South. So therefore, will the Secretary of State release an impact assessment on Britain losing its sovereign capability to produce virgin steel?
Mr Speaker, I'm feeling slightly like a bit of Groundhog Day here because, Mr Speaker, can I explain again? The iron ore, the limestone and the coke is all coming in from abroad. There is no sovereign capability to make steel in the blast furnaces at Port Talbot. However, we are producing high-quality steel in arc furnaces already, which is used in the defence industry. And I've met recently with Sheffield Forge Masters, who are producing steel for nuclear submarines, which is made in an electric arc furnace in the United Kingdom.
Jeremy Stone.
Mr Speaker, we have great hopes, great plans to build offshore floating wind structures in the Cromarty Firth and the surrounding area. This would be fantastic in terms of using the great oil fabrication skills that we have in that area. But does the government recognise that the continued production of steel, and very probably the increased production of steel, is going to be crucial to this plan becoming a reality?
Yes, Mr Speaker, I do agree with the honourable gentleman that it's important that we have a means of producing steel that can be used to build floating offshore wind turbines. Technically, it's quite difficult to do. It would require either steel plate or a very heavily reinforced version of steel coil. And I know that there are discussions going on between TATA and at least one of the likely major investors in floating offshore wind turbines to ensure that the steel can be made and that we can hope that we can be using steel from the electric arc furnace to do just that.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? It's clear that the Minister is keen to find solutions, but obviously many on this side of the chamber and indeed all sides of the chamber are just a bit concerned. So bearing in mind that the fact that steel produced from Port Talbot is the backbone of the much construction in Northern Ireland, which prompted the member for Aberavon to highlight protocol problems with the Prime Minister in the past. I too expressed deep concerns and asked the Minister to explain where our steel will come from for Northern Ireland, for the construction sector, if government isn't able to step in and save jobs at Port Talbot. Thank you so much.
Well, Mr Speaker, in the short term, the steel which is going into the industry in Northern Ireland, I would assume is steel that is being not coming directly from Port Talbot, but probably from some of the other finishing plants. I don't know the full detail of the exact grades of steel which are going to the Northern Ireland construction industry, but I'm happy to discuss that with him. But TATA have made it absolutely clear they don't expect any disruption in supply while the arc furnace is being built. And all those I've spoken to, not just in TATA, but independent experts, have said to me that 90% of the grades that are currently produced using a blast furnace can be produced using an electric arc furnace, and that the technology around electric arc furnace steel production is improving at a very rapid rate. So I would not expect there to be any disruption to supplies in the medium or long term either.
That completes the urgent question. I'll let the front bench change over.